Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on this dreary Friday morning to do some learning. My name is Lauren Smith-Petta, and I serve as Jumpstart's Director of Education. Today's session is our monthly State of AI update for entrepreneurs and is focused on the monthly highlights and headlines of AI, what you need to know in a quick bite-sized 30 minutes, and how to successfully and ethically apply these tools to your business today. Today, we were going to have a dynamic duo, but we have a dynamic single today, Cal, who I'll introduce in a moment, leading this conversation. So Jumpstart offers another webinar series on a different topic every month, along with a variety of other educational programs and events. Visit jumpstartinc.org/smallbiz to explore our services. Before I introduce our presenter today, a few obligatory housekeeping items. This presentation is a mere 30 minutes. Another 30 minutes will be set aside for the Q&A portion so that you can get some input on your own questions. In your toolbar, you should be able to see an important communication tool at your disposal today, the Q&A. You can put your questions in the Q&A as they occur to you, and Cal will address them at the end. At the end of today's session and a follow-up email on Monday, you'll receive a brief survey via email. We appreciate your feedback as it allows us to continue to bring in experts to teach valuable lessons for free and to continue to discuss the importance of AI. All right, without further ado, allow me to introduce our presenter today. We are joined by Cal Al-Dhubaib. Cal is a globally recognized data scientist, entrepreneur, and innovator in responsible artificial intelligence, specializing in high-risk sectors such as healthcare, energy, and defense. He is the founder and CEO of Pandata?
Pandata. Although in
Wonderful.
London, they call it Pandata, so.
I kind of thought it could go either way, but I get the data part. A consulting company that helps organizations to design and develop AI-driven solutions with clients including globally recognized organizations like the Cleveland Clinic, Progressive Insurance, University Hospitals, and Parker Hannifin. Cal frequently speaks on AI-related topics, and his insights have been featured in publications such as Forbes and AI Business News. So as usual, you are learning from the experts today. So welcome, Cal.
Thanks. It's really good to be here. I just got done with Web Summit, which is one of the largest tech events in the world. Over 75,000 actually attended in person. And I almost had a mishap myself, and my flight was delayed 2 hours, but hello to everyone from London. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you and your international flavor and flair. So the way we're going to kind of do this today is a little bit of a back and forth Q&A so that Cal can kind of address some very straightforward questions. And as we go, you can either put your questions in the Q&A or sort of log them away in your brain so that he can address your questions at noon. So Cal, let's dive right in. What do you believe are the most significant advancements in AI over the past year?
Well, actually, I'm curious. Do the attendees get to respond in the chat if I ask a question?
So let me enable it.
Cool. We'll go a little chaotic here and make this fun, so that it's not just me talking. But I'm curious, and the answer to this question really depends on who you are. So 3 options: either identify yourself as user, builder, facilitator, and this is predominantly your interaction with AI. Are you somebody who's using GPT and generative AI tools, but not really getting into the programming? That's user. Are you a builder, somebody who's getting into the development, or are you a facilitator, somebody who's dealing with policy, ethics, or regulation, or supporting enablement of these tools? So just drop builder, user, enabler in the chat, depending on how you identify. User. Cool. Great to see you. Awesome. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of users. We've got a couple of facilitators in the room. Smaller number of builders. This is very typical. Love coming up with additional options. Glad to have you here, Robert. So me, over the last 12 months, we're actually just at the anniversary of ChatGPT being released to the public, which is really interesting. And at first, with these language models, this field of generative AI, the race was how many examples of language can we give them? The companies that amassed the largest data sets, like OpenAI, had the highest performance, and we started to beat benchmarks on specific tasks. And some of you may have seen the headline earlier this year with one of OpenAI's latest models, GPT-4, where they performed at the 90th percentile with GPT-4 on the bar exam, for example, amongst many other standardized tests. And so for very early on in this process, or in the last 12 months, the focus was on scale. Can we get more examples? The bigger the model was, the more performant it was. But recently, in the last 6 months, the interesting shift and where we're really going to start to see the value of these tools proliferate is in terms of what's called multimodal AI. So this is models that don't just deal with one thing. Historically, that would be an AI tool that is specialized in computer vision. All it can deal with is images or scans or things that can be represented as an image. Or language. It would take text and respond with other text. But in reality, the way we operate with most tasks, and if we want to think about automating those tasks, we're dealing with multi-sensory input. If you look at any given document, it might have some charts in it. It might have other expressions or illustrations in addition to words. And so the next iteration and things that I'm really, really excited about is AI that combines many of these channels together. And I got ahead of myself here. I usually almost always start with a definition of what AI is before I dive into it. Feeling a little flustered being the only presenter. That being said, whenever I talk about AI, I talk about AI as software that does two things. It recognizes patterns and it reacts to patterns. We've been using AI for a very long time. In fact, most of the times it's behind the scenes, whether you're consuming recommendations on which products to buy on Amazon, or you're benefiting from, you're a patient at a hospital and there's some process on the back end helping facilitate the identification of tumors in radiological image. The new thing that everyone's talking about that we're finally starting to experience is this very small niche of AI that has gotten widespread adoption, and that's generative AI. And that's taking examples of inputs that might be text, they might be images, and giving you a response in natural language and creating new examples. So instead of just consuming patterns and then doing something with it, we're actually consuming patterns and creating.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that when we think of AI, we think of generative AI as a sort of group of business people at this point.
Yeah.
So speaking of business, how has the integration of AI in, many, many industries, countless in fact, but specifically healthcare, finance, transportation, how is it changing the game in some of these industries?
So this totally depends on your perspective. And the reason why I asked that survey early on is, are you builder, facilitator, or user? And it's really interesting because we're entering a state where what we can build as far as these models go is outpacing our ability to adapt and actually adopt the tech. And for some, this is kind of like, okay, what do we do with this? And in my experience, or what I'm seeing is very lumpy adoption, depending on how regulated a certain industry is or a function is across industries. Interesting consequence of this is we're seeing huge impact on personal productivity. So think Microsoft's Copilot product. This is basically integrating functions like ChatGPT directly into Word, directly into your Outlook, so you can synthesize and streamline email writing, creation, and editing. There's been a lot of adoption over the last 12 months on that front. We're seeing a lot of adoption in marketing applications, creating new content, There's a couple of platforms that are getting more widely accepted in marketing functions like Writer and Jasper that are used to create and customize content at scale. So we're seeing a lot of adoption there. And we're seeing some of that adoption happen, in fact, in regulated industries like healthcare and finance. What we're not seeing, or what's staying in the prototyping phase, is what comes next. The most natural application of these language models in generative AI is, think of it as being able to more effectively deal with content and knowledge management across an enterprise. So any one of our organizations, especially larger ones, have documents, policies, procedures, invoices, unstructured documents that represent a lot of different business transactions. The holy grail is being able to connect these documents and pieces of content to these generative tools so that anybody can ask any question at any time and get an expert level answer, create faster. And what's getting in the way of that right now is policy. That some of these challenges that generative AI introduce, and we'll talk a little bit more about the ethics of this in a little bit, is that it's very hard to imagine how these models break. And to deal with issues like copyright protection, making sure that the models don't make up information or create patterns that look real, but actually aren't. And what I'm seeing happening, especially in these high risk industries, is teams are being spun up and they're being given resources and they're actually working on these projects, but they're taking it up all the way to a pilot phase and then not being able to move beyond that.
I'm glad you mentioned ethics because as an educator, as a coach, as a business person, as a writer, I oscillate between being super excited about AI and being super petrified about AI. And so, on that note, I want to ask, what ethical dilemmas does the current state of AI present, and how should different industries and small businesses in particular address them?
I consider myself cautiously optimistic when it comes to AI. I'm very pragmatic about it. I think it's a beautiful thing. AI is a form of automation, and it's a tool like any other tool. I can use a hammer to put paintings up on my wall. That's a beautiful use of a hammer. I can also use a hammer to accidentally break my glass table. So like any other tool, we need to understand how it works, when it breaks, when to trust it, when it's the right tool for the job. And in fact, I worked very closely with Cassie Kozyrkov. She was the former chief decision scientist at Google. I really love how she puts it. The whole point of a tool is for it to be better than humans. Right? You hear a lot of people say, oh, well, what if it's better than humans at X? And her anecdote is, you know what's better at memory than a human? Pen and paper, right? So the whole definition of a tool is for it to exceed us in some capacity. And a lot of these ethical dilemmas stem from the fact that we don't have a lot of lived experience dealing with the risks and unintended consequences of these tools. A big challenge I see is we anthropomorphize AI. Have you, and I can see your face when we talk to you, but have you seen the rock dilemma?
No.
So humans we're strange creatures. You take a rock and you look at it and you're like, okay, this is a rock. But if I put two sequins on it that look like googly eyes and draw a smiley face, all of a sudden you have emotions towards this thing. You find the rock cute. We do this with AI. We anthropomorphize it. Something that many might have already heard the term in use is called hallucination. This is when this is the politically correct term that has been introduced for when a generative language model says something that looks like it could be true but isn't. There were headlines a few months back about an attorney that used a generative model to submit a case in court, and it cited precedents and it looked legit. Except if you actually search the cases that it was listing, none of them were real. That's an example of hallucination. So the model was very confident. It looked plausible. It was putting words together that seemed like it was a thing. We call that hallucination. We have other problems with these language models, including how we think about the way they learn and are trained. And the more we use human language to describe the models, the more we expect them to behave like people. And so there's a lot of challenges with that. But to break down some of the biggest risks when it comes to generative specifically, it's that the examples that they're trained on aren't representative of reality or don't correctly encode human values. I'll give you an example. You are 2 to 3 times more likely to be described negatively in your electronic medical record as a person of color than if you're not. And so if we're using these examples and mine data from electronic medical records to build up patterns, oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me okay?
You've got two speakers, it sounds like, and one of them is sort of going in and out, so it's just a
Okay,
little blippy. So
cool.
I'm not sure if being closer
Yeah.
to it, I'm not sure what could help.
All right. Well, let me know if you still have struggles and I'll switch over to my headset, but hopefully this speaking a little bit louder will help.
This is better already.
All right, awesome. Well, I'll just leave it in. Thanks, folks, for dealing with that and for bringing it up. So to get back to my example, selection of examples is really important. And when we have these examples, like when we know for a fact that medical records contain problematic biases, and by default, we attempt to use language models on these sources, we could unintentionally encode these problematic biases in the output of them. So we have problems with representation and examples. We have challenges with hallucination, which I talked about. Then there's issues with copyright. Oh, all right. We're getting continued video struggles. Give me
Sorry,
one
Cal.
moment. No, it's all good. I normally have a full setup for this.
I know.
Appreciate everyone's patience on this.
I appreciate yours too. I know you just landed and pretty much joined this webinar, so I appreciate it.
Indeed. All right.
This is such a good example of the risks of technology, right, everybody?
Well, see if we still have AV challenges, which I encounter frequently at many of these events. Uh, we should we shouldn't have to worry too much about AI taking our jobs just yet.
Fair enough. You were talking about copyright challenges.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just switch over the audio. Should be good.
All right.
All right, folks. How's that?
I think it should be better. We'll give it
Cool.
a
All right.
go.
How's that, everyone? Can you hear me okay now? That did it switch over the audio or?
It did.
Okay, cool.
They're liking
Awesome.
it.
Thank you so much. All right, sweet. I appreciate the votes. Cool. All right, back to it. All right, so just to round up, so far we talked about representation. We talked about the challenges with hallucination. I started to talk a little bit about copyright. And this is the notion of whenever you're using these generative tools, how do you have assurance that in the training data set, there isn't protected material? And this is really being pushed to the forefront in the creative sector. When we talk about things like the group DeepMind, they just released a music synthesizer. And I think they have a couple of examples. One is with T-Pain, and the music that can be generated by any command, like, hey, write a song about this in the voice of T-Pain, sounds shockingly like the artist. So when consuming these tools, how do you verify that there was in fact consent given? How do you verify that when you do in fact use that content, that you're not unintentionally violating someone else's copyright? So these are a collection of challenges that generative AI is bringing to the forefront.
Yeah, so with these challenges, with these risks, with everything good comes some bad. And now a new term I've learned today, hallucinations. My next question for you is, I mean, not as much how do you see AI impacting the future of work, but more so, what can small businesses and entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises do to prepare for the changes on the horizon?
I love this. I love this question. It's so appropriate because this was what Web Summit was all about. In fact, as technology advances, my biggest takeaway is that it's our opportunity to become more human. There's a lot of toil that we do today. In fact, the way we approach workforce hasn't changed much since the Industrial Revolution. We're really good at measuring certain KPIs, like how many widgets did we produce, how much time was spent in an office, and that correlates to productivity in our minds. This is our management mindset. What we're seeing with these new tools is we have better aid. For example, I can take notes from a Web Summit session, multiple conferences on my phone, copy it all, put it into GPT-4, and I can say, hey, give me 3 different flavors of a LinkedIn post that summarize the key takeaways. And then I take that and I drop it back in my editor and I change it around and I add my own voice. I'm pushing through what would have been a creative wall, like, oh my gosh, how do I want to tell this story? And normally I would have had to engage a person. I can get through that faster. It allows me to spend more time on strategy. It allows me to spend more time on thinking about the right message. It doesn't remove how much I have to contribute, and it allows me to do more. The future of these generative tools is going to look like a workforce that is able to be more strategic, spend more time problem solving. And we have so many problems to solve. Our whole economic system is based on problem solving. Um, you're saying that we've cured every cancer, we've cured every hunger issue we have on the planet, or energy management, or we're going to use these tools to allow us to solve more problems. Now, the thing that comes with that, though, is how do we manage productivity when more of the population is going to need to be strategic instead of counting widgets and spending time in offices? And we don't have management that's prepared for that, but that's an opportunity for the folks in this room.
That really brings me perfectly and neatly into my next question, which is, by being more efficient, by being more productive, what you're saying is not that it's replacing jobs, it's changing jobs. Can you elaborate on the opportunities that AI presents in the midst of writer strikes and things like that that are so intimidating?
There is going to be a lot of job disruption. I'm much more optimistic, and I find it important to disclose my biases. There's folks that say, hey, most jobs are going to go. And then there's folks saying nothing's going to happen. I sit somewhere in the middle where I think most jobs are going to change their flavor and what they look like, and what's being done. In fact, I instead of asking like, hey, what jobs are going to go away, it's probably a more interesting exercise and practical one today to say, how is accounting going to change with the rise of generative AI? What is that day to day going to look? And it's going to be very different for some people. Other jobs are going to look more or less the same. Um, there's also a whole family of new jobs that are being created. As we have more automation happening, we're creating more complex systems. In fact, AI is not just one thing. It's many little models that are talking together, working together, orchestrating a process. Um, as we have more automation, we get more complexity. And we're going to need more validating, more testing, more human oversight. And the dirty secret behind all of these generative models is the secret to building them and keeping them useful and productive is an army of human labelers. And when we think about generative AI, for example, for something like synthesizing clinical notes and being able to go from a doctor patient conversation into a, hey, here's a complete listing of the diagnosis and what happened here. The person creating those good examples, they have to be medically qualified. This is not a low cost job. So there's a lot of these examples where it's going to be human plus machine, expert human plus machine, maybe a lot less toil. Maybe we don't have to worry so much about learning how to code in a very specific arcane language, but knowing how to check the work or the output of the AI system, very different.
Fair enough. So that brings me to a question to elaborate on um, specificity in certain industries.
Yeah.
I am a college educator, and so I rack my brains about this pretty much every day, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
us are. But I think this pertains to all of us as people who had an education, are getting an education, are educators, our family are getting an education. For example, how should educational systems evolve to prepare students for an AI-driven world?
So I gave a keynote to Hathaway Brown's head council about a month ago, a month and a half ago, about this very topic. And it's interesting. We ascribe value to things that are scarce, and we used to test or benchmark somebody's proficiency based on being able to spend time on it. So when we have assignments that would say write an essay about X and make it 5 pages, you really had to know it to keep going on for 5 pages. And we've all seen those essays and examples of work where the student was just rambling and saying the same thing in different ways. Guilty of having done. One of the hardest classes I took in college that wasn't a part of my math background was actually a journalism. And for the first time in my life, the professor graded me on how short my paper was. The final paper had to be no longer than a page and a half, and it had to cover the whole story that was selected. And man, that was hard. So it's now cheap to produce words. And yet we're still treating that like, okay, this is the demonstration of knowledge. We have a new tool. This is no different than the debate we had a decade and a half ago about the use of scientific calculators in exams in college. So yeah, it's changed. And we have the opportunity to raise the bar, encourage students to use generative AI tools to solve problems, and then have the students critique the output. Um, there's an interesting article I read in the Harvard Business Review recently about upskilling and reskilling in the age of AI. And most skills now have a half-life of 5 years. And in tech, it goes down to 2.5 years. So by the time you are done with your college education, you've got about 2 to 3 useful years of some of the skills you've learned. It's going to be more important to learn how to be adaptive and to learn how to apply critical thinking and how to inspect and verify and learn to trust these tools than it is to necessarily know how to prove that an equation is correct and the right way to solve it, or know how to do something in such specific technical detail.
I like it. It makes me feel like I'm maybe worrying more than I need to be. So that's soothing to me and other educators, I'd imagine. So we're at our time for Q&A. Did you want to make any final points while I set up the chat and the Q&A and the list of folks here?
I would love to take this to Q&A. I've spent the last 30 minutes or so talking. I want to hear from everyone and hear what's interesting to you.
Awesome. So you guys, as our guests, you can either put your questions in the formal Q&A, but you can also raise your hand and I can unmute you. Hmm.
Hey, Brad.
Well,
Welcome.
look at the dummy that thought things were starting at 12:30 instead of 11:30.
Oh no.
These are human problems that the AI hasn't figured out how to solve. I'm so sorry, guys.
It's okay.
You're
Cal
all good.
handled it with grace.
No, Cal's a beyond a professional when it comes to presentations and AI interest. It's probably a way better presentation than if I was involved in it. So.
I missed your technical insights, Brad. I'm glad that you're here.
Oh, you mean the rabbit holes that no one cares about? And by the way, you're highly technical. You're just good at explaining it.
Well, welcome,
I see
Brad.
we have
a couple questions.
How does a business protect its trade secrets? I like this one because this is right up my alley. I spend a lot of time thinking about risk management of these AI systems. It all comes down to how much you trust the company with the service level agreement that you have between that company and you or your organization. So let's say you're using ChatGPT as just a regular user. The terms of service are very rigid. And by default, you are opting in to allow them to retrain on any examples that you provide to it. You can get an enterprise level subscription with them that allows you to call it more programmatically where that isn't the case. But it's not too different than the debates that we had 5 years ago about, oh, can we process patient data on the cloud? Can we use AWS to do these types of things? And it comes down to do you trust the company? Have they passed security testing? As far as protecting your trade secrets go, a lot of this has to do with user education. So we work in a lot of these regulated spaces, hospitals, energy companies, and the worst thing about it all is that we go through everybody's data privacy training. Has anyone sat through like a very obnoxious 2 hour long, like, hey, this is how you don't use USBs, and this is how you don't, share information unintentionally. What I'm not seeing is companies introducing new and updated versions of how to safeguard themselves from phishing scams that might be generated from these tools, or how to safely use tools like ChatGPT. Like, don't enter any personally identifiable information when you're using these tools. Here are some simple techniques that you can use to check or make sure. That's one side of it. And then another side of it, I heard this recently from one of the AI team leads at NVIDIA. And she used the term that we used to have security through obscurity. Most of the time, these documents were safe because we weren't really mining them at scale to be used with these generative applications. And now all of a sudden, we're realizing if we point a model at a collection of documents and we haven't carefully vetted those documents, there's a good chance that those documents might contain things like phone numbers or private information. We see this all the time with customer chat logs, where individuals might disclose their phone number or social security in an inappropriate way to the company, and now it's stored in the chat. And if we point generative AI tools blindly at these data sources, we're going to introduce risks. So, long story short, it's a lot of awareness and a lot less about the inherent nature of these tools. Brad, I'd love to hear your thoughts if I missed anything on that.
Yeah,
You are a security guru.
Wow. I have to dig myself out of a hole as a security guru. But so maybe start, because when you use a term trade secret, you're using a term that has legal implications. And there's an interesting nuance in that trade secrets aren't protectable via law. So it's like if you have the formula for Coca-Cola and it gets out of the vault, it's open season now. So trade secrets have a bar or a risk issue that is much higher than some sort of protectable intellectual property. So if you're worried about trade secrets, you have to ask yourself, what's the risk of that information getting out? Once it's out, it can't be pulled back in. And so the one of the differences between some of the ways that people are using generative AI right now is versus, let's just say, Cal, to your point of like cloud. If I have cloud storage or I have a cloud server, it's still inside of my control. Amazon's not going in and looking at what's inside of my server. They technically can, but it's not really. If I start sending actual textual data to some model, I'm sending it to an application. So as you go up the stack, you're now exposing things to applications. Applications can be hacked. APIs can be hacked. And whereas servers, yeah, I guess you could, but that's kind of like whether you host your server in the cloud or your own colo, that's your responsibility. Like you should keep those things from being hacked. So is it something that should say don't move? I don't know that it gets to that point unless you're in a highly regulated industry. And so the question is, do you just turn off Gen AI because you're worried that trade secrets might get out? There's options where you can host things privately. Now, the Gen AI through OpenAI is great. It's the best of breed. There's going to be new stuff coming out from Google with Gemini. But there's ones that you can host locally to say, like, summarize a document that are as performant and high quality as GPT-4 for those type of niche applications. And so you can have different options. Hey, OpenAI for a lot of things, anything that might smell like a trade secret, we can deal with that locally. And then you don't have to lose sleep about it. It's your application, it's your kind of setup. And then you're like, okay, I can get some Gen AI capability, but not let it out of the barn.
Nope.
We lost you there, Lauren.
We've had audio challenges this webinar.
Human challenges, audio challenges.
No AI challenges though, so that's good. So all right, so I'll call out the next one in order. We've got ChatGPT with Microsoft Copilot. So again, it seems like the company data safe. We have addressed that, but Brad, do you have any thoughts on how the different flavors of these language models play?
Yeah, so it would be nice if we had technological tools that controlled all of that. And people are starting to work at some of it, but I think you start from the point of let's enable our employees to extract the most value out of AI, and the generative stuff seems to be the most interesting parts. So I've heard people be like, well, should we use Microsoft Copilot or should we use ChatGPT? I'm like, use them all. They're good for different purposes. Hey, if I'm making PowerPoint presentations, let's use the native tools. But because there's not necessarily a great technological control of like PII, or to the previous point, trade secrets, that policy and procedure, and then also just demonstrating from an executive level of, we're all smart people. Put your smart person hat on and think about the implications of how you're using that. And that's the best control we have right now, other than turning it off. And I don't think turning it off is good.
It's funny that you say, like, reminder that you're a smart person. I found myself being very dumb recently with trying to, like, and I try to pilot these tools as they come out. And I was like trying to get Google Duet to respond to an email, and I kept regenerating it and regenerating. I'm like, wait a minute. I could have written one line and been done with it, right? There's a lot of times where you actually don't need generative, and it can be done much more effectively without. What I did hear, and I've seen some chatter on Twitter about this, or X, whatever we're calling it these days. It's that Copilot's email functionality is much more advanced than what Google has through Duet. And its convenience of being there in email is great. The Copilot functions embedded in Word make it easier to work with these larger documents. But for most quick personal productivity things, ChatGPT, to your point, works. So it's like the right tool for the right job, depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I've been using their image generator constantly, generated all the images for this type of stuff.
All my slides now exclusively are generative AI art.
Well, and one thing to note about Copilot too, because we wanted to implement Copilot at Expedient where I work, and it's $30 a user a month, and there's what is it, 300 user minimum, something like that. It's basically 10 G's a month and we're like, well, it's expensive. We want to have it as a small group of people. So it just kind of didn't fly yet for us. Once they move that down, then Copilot becomes an issue or an option for us. But for me, I just needed to respond to inbox. Like I needed to sort my inbox better. And like, did I forget to respond to people? So I'm like waiting until they have that. But I'll still use, we have our own internal chat tool. We have ChatGPT. My internal chat tools replace ChatGPT, but I'd be using Copilot religiously. I live in PowerPoint a portion of my time. And to anything that makes that process easier, it's a huge time saver.
Awesome. So I see Savannah asked a question. I'm so glad you enjoyed the Macon talk. Um, so the question is for everyone, what would you, so they started an AI council, they're working on their policy and guidelines, and she wants to know what are the most important factors, considerations, or steps for a small company to roll out these policies and keep sensitive information safe, right? It all starts with awareness. The simplest thing, the simplest step that any enterprise can take today is get their entire workforce up to speed on understanding what generative AI. We're especially if you're working in an area where you've been dealing with sensitive information. Chances are you have gotten privacy training of some sort. Chances are you have gotten that general data protection and hey, don't click suspicious links type training. So our brains are already somewhat wired for this. There's a great new course that was rolled out on Coursera by Andrew Ng. He's a great thought leader in the space. And he had a prolific course before it called AI for Everyone. He just released in the last month, Generative AI for Everyone. It's a free course. It's available to take. Highly encourage it. There's other equivalents out there, but start with awareness and actually get your team and your organization to start flagging and raising the hands of, hey, how might this go wrong in your role based on what you now know about generative? It's called Generative AI for Everyone. And if you have a hard time finding it, look up AI for Everyone. You'll find Andrew Ng. You'll find all his courses. Very, very searchable.
Yeah, and if you want to go down the rabbit hole of technical stuff too, Andrew also has deeplearning.ai. And I mean, he's been a head AI person at Google, at Baidu, I think, just brilliant. And he's assembled a lot of brilliant AI people and great courses. I've taken some of them; they're well worth it. But I think to the question of how do we kind of roll it out responsibly, you can have policy guardrails, but again, they're pieces of paper that everybody talks about, but we're all going through our day-to-day and typing stuff in and checking stuff out. And so there's just got to be a feedback loop, and there's got to be a notion that you can do some experimentation, try and put your corporate policy hat on and control it, but you'll stub your toe sometimes. But the most important thing is like what we call it is like, at least internal to Expedient for our chatbot, is like, this is your gym membership. It's like, here's a gym membership. You could do anything with it or not, but like you have to go there and start using the different machines. You have to use it for image generation. I get excited when I start seeing marketing presentations coming out with AI image generated. I didn't tell them to do that. They're just natively doing it organically. The other thing too is pick areas that you do on a regular basis in your business that maybe don't involve a lot of sensitive information, where you could start to use AI for that, like call them mini use cases or kind of tactical use cases, and say like, hey, we have like a recipe for how you would go about this. And when people start seeing that happening on a weekly basis, like, oh, we solved that problem, or we had this meeting that we could prepare for. Hey, we were going to send this sales email out, but this thing helped summarize all of our previous conversations with the clients, so we didn't have to sift through a bunch of emails. If you can start showing those little tiny wins and successes that could be broadcast across the company, people will start understanding what AI is good for and what it's not. And if your goal would be just to try and do that without exposing any information, but it's again a policy control right now, and so that's a dialogue and all that type of stuff would be necessary.
I love that, and just a point that I like to bring up, and one of the big mistakes I see when it comes to thinking about AI is we equate AI as just automation. And there's a lot of scales out there that show you things like, hey, this is fully machine to fully human. And there's more than that. There's how much control do we actually desire in a situation? Just a silly example, like elevators, fully automated. But we absolutely want the human pushing the button and choosing what floor they go to. And it's not a matter of, hey, are we taking this task and removing the human for it? It's thinking about tasks in terms of what percent of the time do we trust the machine to fully automate the process? What percent of time are we preparing information in a new way for a human to take a better action? And that's actually the largest, like the greatest amount of these types of applications and use cases. And then there is what percent of time do we actually not want to trust any machine process for this and exclusively default to human? And there's flavors in each of those three extremes. But a critical part of learning how to do this right is to make sure that whenever you're starting with a new generative tool, there's three questions. The question is, why are you using AI for this, right? Like, what were you doing before? Do you have a really good use reason why AI? And then you want to understand how it addresses that problem, right? When you can trust it. And then the last thing is, especially if you are getting into a build or a very complex deployment, why you? Why are you specifically the person that needs to invest in it? And how does that make sense with respect to your role? There are so many moving parts in the industry right now that in some cases it makes sense for you to build, it makes sense for you to be an early adopter, and in other cases it makes sense to just watch and wait and have somebody else solve the problem, especially if it's not as central or critical to your business or operation.
Yeah, Cal. I liked your notion of sorting the tasks into buckets, and
Yeah.
I look at it as I'm looking for those opportunities to find the spot where AI can do 80% of the early heavy lifting to like ideate, and then I can put my own voice on top of something or complete a task. I'm not at the point where I've seen, let's use AI to complete tasks for me. I'm just not, I don't know if I should be more trusting, but I'm not that trusting for it to spit out things to like a client, or even taking a chatbot that we use internally and putting that customer forward. I don't have the confidence around it, but man, it saves me that 80% of the front load in a lot of different areas. And towards Savannah's one comment too about the AI policy and guidelines, there's like a QR code for the success kit, which is just something we put together at Expedient, but there's a example policy and guidelines. If you already have one, you ask like, hey, what are some things we could do? There might be some aspects in there. You're like, oh, we didn't think of that. Let's just copy paste it and put it into our policy or run it by our lawyer. But the reality is we're all learning. We don't have like exact perfect policies, perfect legal jargon, perfect verbiage, and that will get you comfortable enough where you can let people off the leash a little bit. Oh yeah, generative AI.
Can you hear me now?
Courses.
Yeah, I got you.
Loud and clear.
Awesome. So just shaking out any other questions that anyone has. Really, these are thought leaders in AI. So any questions that you have on AI, it's a really great time to ask them. We have time for a couple more questions.
You can also both find of us lurking on LinkedIn from time to time.
You could live vicariously through Cal's world travels. I'm just a Clevelander. I don't travel anywhere. Cal, where are you at? You're in London?
I left Lisbon this morning and I am now in London.
That's awesome.
Did either of you have a sort of cherry on top that you wanted to make a final comment for our attendees before we wrap up here?
AI is not one thing. So we do this as a tool. Brad, when you're talking about AI, we have this chat bot, and then when I talk about AI with things that we do with our clients, like figuring out which patients are going to be readmitted or dealing with things like medical images. AI has become this umbrella term that's used for a lot of things. In fact, I was having discussions with some thought leaders at Web Summit this past week about the useful life of the term AI. And a lot of people are starting to look at this the same way that we're looking at technology. It used to be like, oh yeah, we're in tech. And then it became every company's a tech company. And when you say you're in tech today, it's not so much of a useful term. We're drowning in tech. AI is probably going to go that path. And so my call to action here to everyone is just understand that when we're talking about AI, we're talking about many different things. So be specific. Generative AI for the use of content creation, generative AI for image editing, generative AI for knowledge information management. As we get more sophisticated and build better practices around these things, we're going to see definite specialization.
Yeah, I agree. There's a confluence of all these terms. Sometimes they're used for the same thing, and 5 terms are the same thing, and then AI means 20 different things. It can get so precision is quite helpful, and generative seems to be where a lot of excitement is. But actually, the yeoman's work is being done by more classical ML and AI applications that are powering all kinds of things in our life. So I would say, we go back to what's AI good at. It's a great pattern recognizer. It's a great way to extract signal from large amounts of data and noise. And so as you're implementing stuff in your business or just personally, you want to demonstrate successes, and you want to demonstrate small incremental successes. There's a lot of chat in AI about, oh, we're going to implement this application. It's going to be transformative to our business or our industry. There's a lot of little breadcrumbs you have to cross before you get to that point. So if you were just saying, hey, we don't have an application, but we want to do something for our business, what are you going to do? Look at the things that you're doing now that you feel like you're spending a lot of time siphoning and sorting information out. Can we fix that problem, that smallish problem that takes 2 hours a month with AI? And then talk about it and demonstrate it inside of the company. That work will be how you spin the flywheel up with AI. And then a lot of people get distracted by the shiny object of, hey, this is going to make a huge impact on our business. Just you'll get there, but you'll get there in incremental steps, and taking the small steps to just do it and get something going are much better than trying to shoot for the moon.
Thank you. We had some questions come up in the 11th hour here. We have time for one more. So Dion, I'm going to unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Hey there, guys. Just want to say thank you for all of the, extremely valuable information you guys have been sharing today. I had a quick question for Brad. And I just want you to kind of touch on, and I apologize if you touched on it earlier and I missed it, but what is AI doing to the physical world that we live in? I know with your business being in data centers, I'm just curious about how you guys think through some of the challenges of, I imagine that it can be exciting times for your business, but I'm curious just kind of what the overall thought is of AI changing the physical landscape that we operate in.
Can you give me like an example or two of like something that you're thinking about in terms of the physical landscape?
Yeah, so we're building a system that kind of addresses some of the electrification upgrades in terms of in buildings. And so I'm just curious, kind of an overall perspective on real estate and AI and some of those. That's when I say physical, I mean like whether that's in the office space, the differences that have taken place over the last year or so, in retrospect to working from home or working in the office, and just buildings in general.
Yeah, so I haven't thought too much about how it's going to affect physical infrastructure. When somebody throws out like a new use case or question, I'm always go back to what's it particularly good at. So if it's something like a system with a lot of data that we're trying to pull insights out of, like for instance, there's an AI group at the city of Cleveland, and Doug Miles there. I forget who's the other who's
Liz
running
Crow and Doug Mail.
Yeah, right. And they're taking a look at all of the parcels and all kinds of other GIS data at the city, and putting that into a big data store and using AI to try and extract insights about what's going on in the, we'll call it the physical plant. And I think I can't remember if it's City of Cleveland or Cuyahoga County, but it's like a giant amount of data and all kinds of things. Like Doug was telling me, there's properties that have like a 0 square foot footprint. It's like, what is that? Like, no one knows there's these artifacts in the system. So I think like if you just say a particular area of the world to focus on, my first question would be, where's the data there? Is it voluminous enough that using the AI brain applied to it would be valuable? I'm talking about like one specific area of AI, kind of needle in the haystack things. There's all kinds of other applications you can use on lower data sets, but that's the one that I kind of keep going back to because that's the most transformative to me. So I don't know, Cal, if you have any ideas about that particular question area.
My response is pedantic. I think that there is AI for literally every industry and every application. And it goes back to our discussion around the term itself is so broad. So, everything you said, Brad, plus one. And what are those, good way to suss out whether or not it's an appropriate instance where AI could, in theory, add value is how, AI is very intimately related to decision. Whenever we talk about automation, we're talking about making a decision happen faster, or helping a human get there sooner. And that usually means that we need examples. And so I try to understand what are the decisions that happen most often within an organization or within a current setting, which are the ones that are most consequential, and how consistently trained are humans at doing the same thing, right? Are all builders, or all architects, or all insert whomever in a specific niche and industry doing the same task and doing it regularly? And then finally, how often do you capture what happens? Where does that live? What does that look like? How much access do you have to it? And if you can follow that train of logic and you can answer yes to access to the data and yes to consistent best practice and example, then you might have an opportunity to look into leveraging, building, designing AI for that function.
Can you hear me this time?
Gotcha.
Okay, awesome. Well,
Welcome.
I want to be, thank you. I want to be respectful of both of your time and the time of all of our attendees. So we're going to wrap up. Thank you both so much for donating your time and your expertise and your wisdom and your experience. It is so meaningful and impactful for entrepreneurs as they grapple with all of this. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm popping a link in the chat so that you can sign up for our upcoming webinars in December, see more of Brad, learn more about cloud computing. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and thank you again for attending.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.